In this video we're going to look at using a light gel to create an underwater effect. The gel I'm going to use looks like this, and this was made in Genetica 3.6 Pro and is sort of the effect of looking at the underside of a swimming pool, you know, as viewed from underwater. So this is a caustics pattern, and this is going to be applied to one of the new Bryce lights, and Bryce 7.0 or 1, whichever it was added, a square parallel light which has the advantage that you can extend it to infinite width. So you just put it there and it covers the entire ground to infinity. And if I want to use a gel, I click on use gel, click on image, click on an empty square, navigate to where the image is and open that, and there I've got my gel in. It's now applied, and it extends infinitely onto the surface. At the moment I'm using diffuse of 25 and specular of 25. We'll see how that looks. Oh, and the fall off is linear. If I make it none, it'll be very bright because there's no fall off, and obviously progressively less if it's squared, and ranged it will determine on the value here. So I'm just going to stick with linear because that's the default setting. So having done that, we can now see that the gel shining down onto the ground and the ground responding. The frequency of the pattern looks a bit high for what I want, and I can correct that, and also the light's quite close to the ground. So if I enlarge the light, I can squish it down flat a bit, it doesn't matter, it won't affect the way it behaves, and lift it up a bit. What I'll find is it'll have enlarged the pattern, and I can now pull the camera back a bit, see what I'm doing, but it looks dimmer because obviously the fall off means the light's not reaching the ground so much. So I can turn that up to 100 on each of those channels there, and that'll brighten the effect. At the moment then, now we've got our effect working nicely, you can see we've got the standard Bryce sky, so that's not going to look really very underwatery. So if we modify the sky settings a bit, we can create quite a good effect. So I'm going to go into the sky here. I'll use one of the default ones to start with, so we'll use this one here, this Bryce shortcut number 2, and I'll just render what that looks like. Okay, still not very underwatery. Going to sky and fog here, and I'm going to set the fog to some sort of green colour, greeny blue, make it a little bit bluer than that. Okay, and then I'm going to turn the fog right up, so now you can see we can't see very far. It's looking already it's looking a bit more underwater like. If we change the sun colour to a bright blue, for example, then go into the Skylab, go to atmosphere, use blend with sun, and I'm going to disable the sun as a light source because we've already got our other light source here. Then I can use the sun and reposition it, and it'll affect the way, if you look at the preview here, the haze responds. Now you can get some quite dramatic effects. So if we'll position it over on one side there, we now get a bit of colour blending. As you can see, turning the sun off, the ground's looking a bit darker again. But what I thought I could do, I'm just going to back the camera away a little bit more so you can see more of this haze effect. Point it down, right, is I could also utilise another material effect to brighten this up a bit and perhaps make it slightly more varied. So if I select the material for the plane, go into the material lab, I can use specularity. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the specularity up to 100, turn the diffuse right off, so we're only looking at this specular effect, and then turn anisotropy up. You can see how it spreads the specular halo across the surface. And because the gel also has a specular output, that now illuminates this area. So that's the specular response from the light source that we've added to the scene. And you can see there's no response over here because I've turned the diffusion off, but there's a bright line there. That's the anisotropic specular halo. So if I go into the material again and now bring the diffuse in, you can see we get sort of a highlight in this effect, and it fades out. And then what I'm going to do, because that looks still a little bit dim there, is go back to the light source, edit the light source, maybe increase that value to 150, and see how that looks there. So at the moment then, this is I'll just tilt the camera back, open the field of view so you can see how the haze is responding. Maybe this is a bit bright here, this material I can modify I'll make it bluer, but darker, bluer and darker. There we go. So that's intensified that effect there, and then maybe make the sun a little bit darker too. See how that looks. So obviously, just this is the blending point between these two, between the fog and the sunlight, and choosing these different values for this will modify the effect and rolling the sun around to different places. So if we go into the Skylab, link sun to view means that the sun's position is relative to the camera. If you want it relative to the world space, if you understand things better that way, we can unlink that, and then if we look from above, sun rollable position there, that's in front of the camera here, facing north, so that's directly in front of us, and that's now behind us because the camera position, I should have pointed out, is facing north at the moment. So that's the difference between link sun to view and the relative position. If you've got things lit with it in the world space, as you turn your camera, then the sun remains in the same place in the sky. So it's like ordinarily looking around a scene. Whereas if you link the sun to the view, then the sun follows you around the scene. So you can see that in the preview. The sun isn't changing relative to the camera position. So this is just a variation in the way the sky is set up. It's just something to be aware of when you're setting scenes up. So having done this and made our sky, I'm going to add that sky to the library. It doesn't matter what I do, I've put it in there, and I'm going to edit and copy this light source that I've created, and I'm going to graph this into another scene now. The scene I'm going to use is one of my own that I've already created. I'm going to go to brycetutorials.info, Bryce downloads, and under here we've got Bryce Pro Advanced Lighting 2, and I have an underwater scene at the bottom here that looks like it could benefit from a bit of additional lighting and effects. So I'm going to load that scene in over this one. So I'm just going to drag and drop over this one. Don't save that because I've saved all the appropriate things. So that's the scene loaded. If I now edit and paste, that'll bring in my caustic light source there over the top. And I can also go to the Skylab and bring in the sky I was working on as well. So I can bring in both those things. I know from experience that the render options for this have been set up for quite a sophisticated render, but in this case I'm just going to do a regular render and it'll operate a lot faster. And I'm going to get rid of this parallel light that's already in the scene that was providing an effect, and I'm going to get rid of this streaming ray effect as well. So I get rid of those two things, and then I've only got the light sources that I've provided now, which is the sun, which it should be turned off if I remember rightly. Yes, it's disabled. So the only light source at the moment is this caustic light from above and the effect with the fog. Okay, so what we can see at the moment is that the caustic effect might be a bit too low frequency, so I'll take this parallel light and I'll just shrink it down a bit so that it brings the frequency up relative to the scale of what we've got in the scene. Also the shadow there is a bit strong, so I can edit this and I can reduce the shadow intensity, which means that so much of the light will travel through solid objects and light the ground now, and so that now gives a less intense shadow there. If I wanted to have these things fade out more, I could lower the brightness of that, so it gives it a bit of a feeling that things are fading into the distance, and that provides you with sort of a very straightforward, simple lighting setup for this scene, which incorporates this material that's the special effect. I'm going to reduce. So because there's only one light source, and this special effect with the light gel makes things look a bit more complicated than they really are, the render time is very low, only a few seconds on this machine, so that has its advantages. And the illusion of more sophisticated lighting, to a large extent, is for an underwater scene, is just being provided by the haze in this case. As you can see, it's fully anti-aliased out in very short order. Let's have a look. So here's our haze. If I temporarily disable this light source from doing anything, so I'll get rid of its diffuse, Well, first of all, I'm going to see what the specular's doing in this scene. I'm curious now. Not a lot, because there isn't very much specularity in this, so that's something that could be improved. But here you can see that the haze is adding an illusion of ambient light just by fading things into the distance. If I was to switch the haze off temporarily, everything looks a lot blander, well, blacker indeed. But as I was saying, this ground material, if I want to get back to the effect I had before, I can go into the material editor. I can add in specularity here, and then I can add an anisotropy, and we'll see how that's going to respond to the effect. So okay, you can see it's brought in some fairly noisy highlights, and then when that's combined with the diffuse lighting, but I'll just work on the anisotropic specularity alone. So I'm going to take this specular effect up to 150 for my highlights. So we go. There, that's given me a bit more intense highlight. And then if I edit this again and then stick in 150 for the diffuse, that will be combined with those highlights that are already there, so it should create a bit of brighter localized effect and a bit of variation within it. So there you go, a simple use of a light gel there to create quite a good lighting effect that doesn't take very long to render. Obviously it's dependent on which gel you choose to use in the first place as to whether you get this particular effect or something different. For example, you could use like say a stained glass window and then project the pattern of the window onto the ground, but in a lot of cases it's better setting that up with lights rather than resorting to light gels. An effect like this is more appropriate to the use of this feature. Okay then, I hope that's been helpful to you, and you enjoyed it.